Did you know that there is wisdom in clouds? Find out how on today's episode of This Week in Cloud Computing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 34th episode of This Week in Cloud Computing. I am your host, Amanda Coulong, and joining me from the East Coast, my trusty co-host, Dave Linthicum. How are you?
I'm doing great, Amanda. How's it going?
Good. You sound loud and clear today.
Glad. Those intertubes are working great.
I know. Clear skies. Clear skies.
Clear Skype.
Clear Skype. Oh, that's a good one. So, Dave, you're going to be joining us from Cloud Expo in San Jose. When is that?
That's going to be November 3rd, and I'm going to be on the show floor talking up what I'm going to see at Cloud Expo. So I'm looking forward to hook up with lots of friends and meet some new friends out there. So if you're going to be at the expo, look me up.
Great. So make sure you check in with Dave, everybody, especially if you're going to be at the show. I'm very excited for our guest today. We have joining us James Urquhart, market strategist for cloud computing and virtualized data centers at Cisco. Talk about a mouthful. So nice to have you joining us today, James, and we will be chatting with you shortly. We also have some network updates. There are a number of new shows that you're going to be seeing here on thisweekend.com, so make sure you check out the main schedule for all of our shows. We're really ramping up, have quite a few that are coming up. In terms of event updates, we also have Interop New York City coming up. That's October 18th through the 22nd. I'll make sure that I get the link out there for you guys. And if you are looking to sponsor a cloud computing show, perhaps you should think about This Week in Cloud Computing. You can send any sort of requests, or if you're looking for information, send it to sponsor@thisweekend.com or mo@thisweekend.com. And if you would like to participate with us on This Week in Cloud Computing, follow us on Twitter at TWICloudComp and use the hashtag TWICC. And of course, you can always download our shows for free on iTunes. So please rate the shows, tell us what you think, add some comments. That definitely helps us out. So without further ado, I want to talk to you for just a moment about .co. Now, I'm sure that you've heard about different, domain names and what different endings you can use, and it's really hard to find one sometimes if you have maybe a popular name or whatnot. .co is a great web address that gives you many, many more opportunities and that are more recognizable, more credible. A lot of people here at This Weekend have secured .co names through GoDaddy. And it's just great for branding your online presence. So their tagline is create your opportunity. I really like that. If you would like to secure your own .co name, then I would say go over to GoDaddy.com. And actually, if you use the code TWIST10, you can get 10% off of your domain at GoDaddy. And if you would like to follow them on Twitter, we would love for you to do that and say thank you for sponsoring This Weekend. Their Twitter handle is actually at .co, DOTCO. So yeah, Overstock.com paid $350,000 for their O.co address, and VentureHacks even launched its popular Angel list on Angel.co. So get your own .co name now and say thank you. Thank you for sponsoring This Weekend shows. So without further ado, I think we've got a little bit of news on tap. So we've been talking a bit about things overseas with cloud computing, regulations, worries, concerns. Just last week, we talked about Salesforce opening up a data center in Taiwan. Well, the New York Times is reporting this week that there are more regulation and security concerns that are hindering Asia's move to cloud computing. So a lot of the fears are, things like threats posed by hackers, possible government interference, things like that. And so a lot of them are keeping their data centers housed in their own countries. So as a result, cloud computing in Asia is taking off faster among the smaller companies and startups rather than the larger companies. So a number of quotes coming out of Microsoft and IDC, for instance, Emilio Umioka, who's the president of Microsoft's Asian operations in Singapore, says, what will drive adoption is broadband penetration. If you don't have the pipe, you can't get onto the cloud. And then IDC's Phil Carter is saying the propensity to outsource in China is the lowest in the region, and he continues on that China is held back by regulations. So we're seeing a lot of stuff around this topic, but yet we have companies like Salesforce that are going into China and just Asia in general. So what's going on with this? Is Asia ever going to get beyond that governmental and cultural impediment that's happening there, or will the cloud be seen as a mainstream technology? Dave?
Yeah, I mean, this is very much like the internet adoption in China, back in the 80s. I mean, they blocked it at every step of the way, and they're still blocking it today. I mean, you can't get Facebook within China. You can't get a lot of Google sites within China. Everything is filtered going in and out of the country. It's a very weird kind of setup ultimately. So if they don't like Facebook, they're really not going to like cloud computing, and that's what's occurring right now. However, we're seeing kind of an upsurge from the bottom up, from the smaller businesses that are looking at cloud computing as a way to enable their business on the cheap and basically get them the infrastructure they need for about a tenth of the cost of building it through the large government organizations. And so that is ultimately going to push China onto the cloud, but it's going to take some time, and the government's going to have to shift.
Mm-hmm. I would like to pull in our special guest, James Urquhart, on this one as well. We've got James on the phone. James, what do you think about this one in terms of, just cloud computing in Asia in general, the impediments that exist there? I mean, Beijing's even blocked Facebook. There are a lot of things that are prohibited there. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think what's really interesting is, the application functionality is the stuff of value. And so there's certain elements of cloud computing which you can do in isolated pockets. It's just the economies of scale kind of shift a little bit when you do that. So if China builds a mega China-only cloud, they're going to be fine. If a smaller country builds specialized clouds for that are in some ways protected for their legal or cultural requirements, and they get big enough, they'll still be able to save significant money for a small business over them buying colo space and putting servers in the environment. So for infrastructure as a service, I don't see it as a major, huge deal. Although, if the economics become significantly different, then I think you'll find the same sort of things that happened in China, where people are finding ways to get access to the applications, or they're replicating the functionality and trying to replicate the economics. It gets a little bit more difficult when you move up into the realm of SaaS, though. As you move up the stack towards SaaS, because now you get the companies that are innovating, end user functionality that it really matters that it came from them and not from somebody else. And replicating, in my opinion, replicating that environment is a significantly more difficult task, especially when you're trying to do it at scale. So at that point in time, you may actually find, and I think that this is, completely valid, you may find almost sort of exclusivity of functionality and of certain economic models around cloud that are based in part on the legal environment. But, I've been thinking quite a while about the fact that I can imagine clouds existing when the scale gets big enough where, this is only for Fortune 200 companies that, sign a certain agreement with us. But, it's a very large scale environment, but they make sure that, that there's not threats of security issues or threats of consumption issues. On the other end of the scale, if everybody ends up using the same stack, then then it's totally a question of economies of scale. So I can see, to me, it's expected, and I don't think it's a detriment to cloud in the long term. I just think for any given country, it may become an issue for them.
Okay.
Hey James, do you see them building their own infrastructure as a service cloud in China, because there's been a movement in that direction recently, or do you think some of the bigger guys such as Rackspace and GoGrid and Amazon are going to replicate over in that environment?
Well, to be really honest, since China is the kind of the big dog in the room in terms of they have their own high-tech companies, they have their own hardware companies. They basically replicate a lot of what they see in the West. So my argument would be, if you look at what they're doing in their availability zones, they are using I think a fair amount of certain companies, IBM and I think for networking, I think my employer's involved quite a bit there. But I think that there's a lot of their own stuff that they can do, and I think the way they're going about it is trying to meet the needs of their growing, capitalist-like economic elements, bringing people to industrial zones, bringing new companies into play in Chinese cities, and sort of using computing as an incentive for that. Mm-hmm. And if that infrastructure grows in a certain way, I think that China would happily own that industry for themselves, for their own people. That being said, if you look at what's happening with Google and others, they're fighting fiercely to compete in China, and so these existing clouds for the West, I think very much have a chance in China. I just think that, in my opinion, if the Chinese government could own the cloud in China, they would happily do so.
Interesting. I mean, another point that I wanted to bring up in the second story here, too, is a follow-on to that. You mentioned just competition for, Asia in general. We even see Intel, their CEO is visiting Taiwan to sign a cloud computing deal with the economic minister there. So do you think that moves by large companies like that into the area are going to help with cloud computing for the enterprise there? Or do you think it's merely going to be a mix, too, of what the focus is, whether it's SaaS or platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and which part of the stack they're in?
Well, my opinion on that too is just that this is sort of market forces at work.
Yeah.
First of all, I think until China shows that they have a chip manufacturer that's replicating Intel chips, Intel has a good reason to go to these countries, right, and really push. It's the box manufacturers, it's the motherboard manufacturers and so on that I think will have more of a challenge. I think there's great opportunity for Western companies in China and in all of Southeast Asia. And I'm not meaning to say that to kind of push that out, but I think going to Taiwan, going to China to negotiate these deals makes a lot of sense. But I think ultimately, if you look at what China wants to do, they'll want to own as much of this business as they can.
Mm-hmm. One final stat I wanted to throw out there too from Markets and Markets Research. They're saying that the global cloud computing market is expected to grow from $37.8 billion this year to $121.1 billion in 2015, with SaaS being the largest contributor. Do you think that's about right, James, or do you think that they're a little off with the numbers?
Oh my God! I tell you, these numbers they're funny to me in the sense that everybody includes different things in their numbers and doesn't include other things. So it's really hard to do a comparison. I think the growth rate that they're talking about there is pretty reasonable, but if you define cloud to include private cloud and hybrid cloud environments in addition to public cloud. I don't see public cloud only environments necessarily. No, it's possible with small, medium businesses. It's possible that they could continue to grow at that rate as well. But I think, really, there's still a lot of redesigning operations and redesigning applications that has to be done in order to really, spur that kind of growth. I think we've seen the low-hanging fruit really take off. And I'd love to hear Dave's opinion on this too. But just from what I've seen so far, is now people are kind of sitting down and doing the longer-term planning to figure out what it's going to take to move other elements and what elements they want to keep in-house and so on. And I think that to make that kind of prediction on market growth, you've really got to incorporate all of IT into that, and that would include what people build sort of in a more hybrid or even on-premise perspective.
Yeah, you're definitely speaking Dave's language with the private and hybrid clouds, right, Dave?
Yeah, I think they're. Well, the thing is these numbers, if you kind of look at them against the IDC numbers that I'm seeing, the IDC numbers are probably twice as large. And I think the IDC numbers, to James's point, are really kind of throwing all of the existing private cloud and anything that looks like a cloud into that market space. So this may be really just kind of focused on the growth of the private cloud space. And I don't really believe that it's going to be this high. And I think we're tossing a lot of stuff into that. But I do think that the percentage in growth based on what we end up in 2010 is pretty accurate. So where we end up this year, if we take a look at this and we take a look at the percentage of growth of the number of years, I think that's the answer to the question. These numbers may be a little inflated in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely getting to that time of year where we're going to see all sorts of people coming out with their own predictions. So it'll be entertaining, to say the least, to compare some of those. Let's jump ahead to Interop coming up in New York City. Information Week sat down with the general manager of Interop and talked about what some of the trends would be for the show. And the four main C's that came up were cloud computing consolidation, consumerization, and CIOs. So more than half of Interop registrants that were surveyed anticipate that their IT budgets will get a much needed boost in 2012. So we've got these four C's. Is that where the money is actually going to be spent? So again, we've got cloud computing consolidation, consumerization, and CIOs. Dave, do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's awful funny how they force the first letter C into all these things. So
I know.
I get a little
Is that marketing? Is that
that
cloud washing right there? I don't know.
But it is a bit marketing. But I think that ultimately what CIOs are looking for today are going to be efficiency in terms of their IT spend. And if that's cloud computing or stuffing cheese into the servers, it's whatever works. And they're going to move in that direction. So I think that cloud computing is going to be a focus in terms of how it relates to the efficiencies of the enterprise. You're going to see a lot of private clouds being built, AKA just making their enterprise more virtualized, more effective and efficient as to how they manage their existing resources, leveraging public cloud where it's necessary, but they're not necessarily going to focus on that. I think in the next few years, they're going to focus on basically reinventing their existing infrastructure, starting to spend a little bit more money on infrastructure, but as it goes to the value of IT. So that's where the money is going to be spent, and that's really going to be the focus of Interop, is how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. James, would you agree? I mean, first off, are you going to Interop? Can people find you there?
Well, actually, I won't be, mostly because I'm going to be on a family vacation at that point in time, but I'll be paying close attention to it. But Interop's one of my favorite shows for cloud computing, even though it isn't, specifically a cloud show. But what I've found is, some of these shows that are targeted at operations in general have the most interesting cloud content, because really cloud is an operations model, and as such, these are the guys that really have to face, both the value of cloud and the challenges of cloud in the biggest way. So. So I think those four C's they're cute, but I think the consolidation story is a really interesting one, because if you think about it from a terms of a cloud computing perspective, in some ways the goal of cloud is to make whether you're consolidated or not, less interesting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And So from that perspective, it's almost a redistribution of stuff again. I think Dave's hit the nail on the head, right? I think it's two things. So one is increased efficiency of capital dollars is one element of it, but also then will be increased efficiency of cash flow in the IT organization. So for the flow of funds that are moving, can you get more done? Can you take more risk? Can you maybe find new innovations that were more difficult to find any other way? So that would be to me the focus, really, what it boils down to. Consolidation is still important from a data center ownership perspective, but from a software development perspective, I think the move is going to be to really look at all operations models and look for those that are most efficient for different forms of applications that are being delivered. Mm-hmm.
Great. So you're saying people should definitely go to Interop, right? We should definitely.
Yeah, I think Interop's a great show for picking up on what's going on with cloud. Again, I think the application development shows are interesting too, but really the new dev models are really fun. But that's if you're a development person, that's really cool. But if you're really concerned from an IT organization perspective, the biggest hit on the IT organization is actually going to be in terms of what you do from an operational perspective. And there's a big transitional phase in operations. Where organizations are going to have to shift from what I call the vertical silos, the server compute network storage kind of silos of responsibility, into more of an application, service, and infrastructure kind of more horizontal split of responsibility. And the ways in which that happens are going to be really disruptive. I mean, DevOps is a term that most of your listeners have probably heard at least once or twice. And I mean, the whole idea behind that is to bring operations to the application directly and have an application layer operations capability, which gets developed as the application gets developed and deployed. And I think that is just one example of getting operations people involved in the development process on a day-by-day basis. Is one of those kinds of changes, but there's many like that. And I think you'll hear that and feel that at Interop much more than you will at a show that's more targeted towards developers and application architectures.
Well, you definitely just jumped into something we're going to get into with your interview, so I knew you wouldn't be able to hold back with the operations piece.
Okay.
It's fine. Next story, Read Write Web. Audrey Waters is talking about the Gartner hype cycle for 2010, and surprise or not, cloud computing is at the peak of inflated expectations. So Gartner defines this as a phase of overenthusiasm and unrealistic projections. So are we in for a cloud hangover after the cloud party, or is this hype leading us to a productive end state, Dave?
Yeah, I think we're in for a bit of a hangover. And it's funny. It's like I figure that my role in life right now is, as I do a lot of blogging and speaking, is running around and telling people what cloud computing won't do, because there's so many people running around actually inflating cloud beyond all expectations and all reasonable ability to deliver. So we're into this kind of my cloud can save me kind of mode to people who are not in the know, and people who are in the know kind of just understand that that's the hype, and we've been through this stuff before. But we are, just as I saw in all the other technological, revolutions, we're going to be in for a bit of a downer in terms of what this stuff is able to do. And at the end of the day, this is computing, and this is storage, and this is operationally tough, and these are tough decisions, and that there's no easy path into cloud computing, whether you go private, hybrid, or public, or not at all. And I think that's starting to appear on people's radar screens these days, and they're not listening to the hype as much anymore, but it's raging out there, and I think we're in for a hangover and perhaps a few walks of shame across the campus.
Yeah, a few walks of shame. I like that one. James, would you agree?
Yeah, I think one of the big areas where you're going to see some reality hit home is also among the development community, and sort of this belief that cloud has freed them from all restrictions to develop whatever they want and to be as scalable as they want to be. I know a number of people who are making a lot of money in the professional services industry, helping companies kind of overcome their overenthusiasm or at least their oversimplification of the tasks at hand. To Dave's point, and Dave being one of them. And I think that though that there's going to be some reality kind of hitting home that it's not simply the case of adopting the right open source products and then going out and using Amazon to be able to scale to Facebook numbers. There's a lot more to it than that, and so companies that will run into issues around scale and issues around availability in the cloud will probably, take a few, heartbeats to figure out where they go next. Yeah. I think we've already started down the trough of disillusionment. I think Gartner's behind a little bit. I think you've got a number of people out there already who are sort of saying, we want to invest in the cloud, but we want to be very cautious because we've already seen some things that make us very nervous. And so I'm not convinced that we're at the top. I'm thinking we've already headed down that path for a couple of months at least. So.
Yeah, it seems that way based on the news that we've seen as well. I mean, we're hearing a lot of stuff about it's the service providers that are going to do really well. We're hearing all this stuff about consolidation. We're hearing all of these concerns. You've got people that are creating organizations and groups around things like the Cloud Security Alliance and things like that to address a lot of the concerns that people have and address best practices and that sort of thing. So. Yeah, I think, walk of shame, as Dave puts it so eloquently. Last story I wanted to cover today, a story out of CRN. A new IBM DeveloperWorks survey is talking about how VARs, value-added resellers, must adapt as cloud and mobility start to dominate IT. So they surveyed about 2,000 IT developers, and the cloud and mobile computing are really the two most sought-after technologies, according to these 2,000 people. Come 2015. What is it with 2015 right now? It's like 2012. I thought, everything was going to end by 2012. Anyway, do you agree with this, guys? Do you think that VARs have to adapt? I mean, what is the cloud doing in terms of, changing the landscape for VARs, Dave?
I think they got to adapt because everybody else is leveraging this technology. And the thing is, VARs have always had to adapt.
Yeah.
Moved into client server, moved into web-based development, moved into complex distributed computing, moved into virtualization, and now moving ultimately into multi-tenancy and all the things that cloud computing is, the ability to support mobile applications, all these sorts of things. So the VARs out there, they're going to survive and make any money in this space. Have already seen this coming. They're already building this in their processes. I talk to 3 or 4 of these guys a week, and I think they get it. They understand that their business is changing, and they're looking to figure out how to leverage the new paradigm shift to their economic advantage.
Mm-hmm. And James, do you have any additional thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just real quickly, this is not really new news.
Right.
About 2 years ago, or maybe even 3 years ago now, VMware was already fighting a battle with their VAR community, their VAR channel partner community, over the fact that they were going to begin to push cloud computing very heavily. And these guys were scared to death about what that meant in terms of their their installation and sort of operational transfer kind of businesses. And I think that there's legitimate fundamental changes here, where what you're hand-holding an individual client, especially in the small medium business world, what you're doing to hold these guys is fundamentally changing. And I think that's really where the adjustment comes. But to Dave's point, I mean, these guys were already aware that there was a threat 2 or 3 years ago, so they're probably pretty far down the road towards thinking about how to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, definitely curious to stay on track with that story and see what else comes out of it. Well, on that note, I don't know about you guys, but it's getting kind of hazy and cloudy here in the studio. It's kind of scaring me a little bit.
Shield Maiden.
Yes?
Ragnarok is upon us once again.
Who's that?
Oh, never mind. Just go with it.
Okay.
Storm on demand. Storm on demand. Storm on demand is an infrastructure as a service, cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace dedicated servers. A proprietary cloud platform designed by Liquid Web, one of the largest web hosting providers with over 12 years of experience. It is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. Features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, and pay-as-you-go utility-style billing. Options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, fully managed servers, private networking, and swords like this, and little guys that we do not have in this commercial, but it doesn't matter, because this is cooler. Storm on Demand can be found at stormondemand.com, at Storm on Demand. Ragnarok be damned. Storm on Demand. If you do not get Storm on Demand, I will come to your house with my sword and make you get it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I love dancing with men. See? Dancing. We love our little Storm on Demand men. They're actually from liquidweb.com, and Storm on Demand, we adore them because, well, we use them as our CDN. So make sure you follow at Storm on Demand on Twitter and thank them profusely for being an amazing sponsor of thisweekend.com. So I would like to jump into a discussion now with you, James Urquhart. Of course, for those of you who are just now joining us, you are the market strategist for cloud computing and virtualized data centers at a small company called Cisco. And you also have a blog on CNET, The Wisdom of Clouds, which talk about being prolific. Quite a few good thoughts on there. So James, fill us in a little bit about why are you so obsessed with cloud computing?
Well, so it's really interesting, actually. It comes from my background as an application developer.
Sure.
So I worked on distributed application systems since the early 90s. Worked for a company called Forte Software a while ago. But the core of it was I kind of worked in the world where we began to simplify the act of distributing an application. And the first sort of phase of that was to manually sort of say, okay, I want to take this piece of the application, put it here, put it here, put it here. I went to work for after Sun bought Forte some time ago. After a number of years, I went to work for a company called Cassat, which was founded by the Bill Coleman, who's the B in BEA, and its function and its focus, now owned by CA, was to do utility computing infrastructure. The idea being to automate the scale and distribution of the software across a pool of resources. And that, to me, instantly, when I saw the demo, was like, wow, that is the logical next step in that distributed application story. So I'm interested in cloud because theoretically, it should make the building of high-scale distributed applications, and more importantly, the deployment and operation of those applications much, much simpler than it was in the past, which should open up huge new opportunities for innovation, and which it already has. And so I remain interested because I believe that it will fundamentally change the nature of how computers get used in the world, and what it can, the opportunities it opens up for developers in the application space.
That's amazing. I mean, one other thing I wanted to throw out there too, just because you've got some amazing accolades. You were even named one of the 10 most influential people in cloud computing by MIT Technology Review in 2009. So, and 20 years of experience in distributed systems development and deployment. So when it comes to this term cloud, this is actually something that you've been up to for quite a while.
Oh yeah, and I've been writing the blog for I think it's 3.5 years now. Started on Blogger.com with nothing, and crawled my way up to the top of the food chain. But I love writing. It's CNET. I've had some great feedback from my community. And it's been really fun. I followed cloud very closely for a number of years now.
Guys, let's pull up the blog so that we can show everyone the wisdom of clouds here. And you also speak highly of Chris Hoff, I see. I can see why. He's been on the show as well. There we go, wisdom of clouds right there. Just give them a peek of what they can enjoy when they come check out your blog. So it's on the CNET blog network, correct? There we go. All right, well, let's jump back into a discussion here. Let's talk a little bit about the Open Cloud Initiative. I know that's something that you're big into, and maybe some of the core principles that Sam Johnson covered at the Open Cloud meetup this week.
Yeah, so we had a meetup in San Francisco of the Open Cloud meetup, the Open Cloud Group meetup, and Sam Johnson was in town. He is based in Switzerland, but was in town for a Google meeting, and decided to cover some of the concepts that he and the other board members of the Open Cloud Initiative have been working towards. So first of all, they are basically waiting for the California corporate registration, nonprofit registration system to work. And as we all know, who live here in California, with budget cuts, that process has slowed somewhat. But there will be a formal group and a formal announcement around this later. But the idea behind the group essentially is similar to the open source initiative, where there'll be some sort of certification capability and a logo that goes with that certification. They'll be made available to those who'd like to call their systems, open cloud, officially recognized open cloud systems. And the core principle, the key principle of all of it is, want to make sure that there are open protocols to communicate with whatever that cloud technology is, and open formats to the data that's exchanged with the system. So it's not so much that the code has to be open source or not. It's not so much that the data has to be open in the sense that it's freely available to the entire public. It's more that the protocols and the formats to interchange with the open cloud environment is made available. And then that combined with typical kind of open principles around no encumbrance by patents, no encumbrance by copyright or trademark, solid documentation available to the general community, and more than one implementation, preferably with one of those implementations being an open source implementation, mostly for the use case that if there are multiple corporate-owned implementations, then they all go away. Then a customer is left kind of holding the bag. If there's an open source environment out there, they can at least have some source code to begin to attack the problem themselves. So very, very focused on beginning to build a way of making sure that when people use the term open cloud, that they're not abusing the term as much as possible. Of course, you can't stop people from using the term, but at the same time, we want to make sure that there is some community support around the use of that term, and some pretty clear guidelines that help a company sort of say, okay, do we want to go after that sort of full-fledged open cloud capability? It's not a standards organization. It's not defining what those formats are or what those protocols are or even what technologies fit into the space. Right. It's just providing a community environment to support acknowledging when things have achieved those qualities of an open cloud environment.
Okay. Now I want to toss this to Dave for a second, because we've had a lot of discussion on the show before just about the open cloud and just all of these different initiatives and alliances and things that are forming. So Dave, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, there's a ton of them. I kind of agree with the way the Open Cloud Initiative is moving forward. I guess one of the questions I have, James, is haven't we been here before around data interoperability with various systems, and are we reinventing the wheel somewhat with some of the things we're doing with Open Cloud? Do we have people working on that weren't involved with some of these past initiatives, and is there some redundancy here?
Well, again, it's not about defining what the formats are and what any of the actual standards are. It's more about a sort of certification that if a standard or a technology, even a proprietary technology, from proprietary from the standpoint that code's wholly owned by somebody, comes to the table and says they want to be declared sort of an open cloud environment, well, then you've got to make sure there are multiple implementations for multiple folks and so on. It's more like covering the ground that the open source initiative did, but from the perspective of cloud computing, which is a different perspective. It's not about the source code being freely available and readily downloadable. It's about the interchange with the cloud technology being acknowledged open and being available from multiple sources and unencumbered and so on. So I don't see it as retreading from the perspective of of some of the things that we've tried to do around actual standards, things like OCCI and other things like that. It's different than that. It's really just an approach to kind of make sure that if we use the term open cloud, that there's a community with a sense of meaning around that term that has some that has some ability to influence where the market goes with that term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does. One more question. When will we officially have a saturation of cloud consortiums out there? Because I'm getting like one new email every week from somebody who's forming one.
Yeah, I think I'm just to be really honest. Every single existing standards organization has their working group and their effort underway. There's also all the de facto elements out there, and there's the new things like OpenStack and others. To be really honest, this is going to be driven by adoption. It's not going to be driven by introduction into the marketplace. So you're going to see a lot of stuff until we start to see enough adoption of specific technologies and specific standards in the space, specific initiatives, to weed out the ones that aren't so successful. You're starting to see some of this in the API space already, right? So there's some of the APIs that were a big deal a year ago, you hardly ever hear peep out of them anymore because other ones like Rackspace and Amazon and others are starting to really be kind of seen as where the market is moving towards. So yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of roll your eyes time in the cloud world in terms of this stuff, and it's one of the things that makes my life harder as a blogger is trying to find interesting things to write about because there's so many duplicates of what was interesting a year ago now appearing in mass this year. So it is what it is. But I think you'll start to see some consolidation, some acknowledgement of real standards over the next probably 2 to 3 years to be realistic about it.
We hope.
We hope, yeah, and then that'll only introduce new opportunities for new ideas. But that's good because as confusing as it is for the marketplace, and it is, and I acknowledge that it is. There's not a single technology innovation that's happened anywhere that there hasn't been some confusion early on among the early adopters before the early adopters begin to set the course trend. So.
I'm just waiting for consolidation of all of the consortiums. So that's my take on it.
I'm thinking about introducing a consortium standard that defines what a consortium is and how it operates and who can be involved in it. And,
so not just
wants to sign up.
Exactly, not just a definition of cloud computing, but let's also define a consortium. There we go.
There we go.
So speaking of consolidation, though, talk a little bit about IBM and Dell claiming that they can save the federal government about $1 trillion over 10 years through consolidation.
Oh my gosh, you guys hear about this? So the two CEOs wrote an open letter or a blog post or an article of some sort. I think it was a column somewhere, but they wrote one that sort of said, look, we've been looking at this, and we believe that if the government consolidates their supply chain and adopts more aggressively new technologies like cloud computing, that we could save them $1 trillion. And of course, yeah, absolutely. As long your argument would be as long as they adopted you in the supply chain and didn't cut you out of it. The truth of the matter is I think that there's there's both a nervousness and just an overeagerness about the opportunity that's out there related to cloud in terms of the government's enthusiasm to adopt cloud computing as a way to begin to consolidate power, sales power within the federal government. So a lot of us kind of looked at it and said, well, whether or not you could save them $1 trillion, if you started saving them $1 trillion and you consolidated the supply chain, you better believe that your margins would go up, and it would be less of a value for the government versus a much more competitive marketplace. So I see it. It's just one of these eye-rolling events where you sort of say, you know what? Why would you throw that out there to the marketplace when you know that everybody else in the space is going to look at that and sort of say, well, yeah, if they consolidated around me too, I could help them save $1 trillion, right?
Yeah.
And so I hope we don't see too many of these things trying to leverage disruption in the federal government to essentially make these really outrageous claims.
I don't know about you, but just the term disruption in the federal government makes me a little bit nervous. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, it does. And I agree completely with James that this kind of stuff actually doesn't help. And I understand it's thought-provoking, and I actually watched it on Fox Business as well. But, I mean, the reality is this stuff is going to be tough for these folks to change over time. And it is not about implementing particular kinds of technology. It's about changing people and processes and how they morph their architectures to be much more effective and efficient. And that is hard. That's a very hard thing to do. And you can't throw technology at these problems and expect them to be solved.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point, Dave. Is on this is to sort of say, look, you could essentially, anytime you boil it down to fewer people making key decisions about what moves forward, and they're not the people that have the money, but the people that are receiving the money. The unfortunate truth is that it creates another cultural situation that I think is not beneficial to the way that the market would operate. And I'm a big believer that the federal government is making a great move to really look at ways that they can free up their developers and the agencies and the vendors that they work with to have more choices in the way IT is implemented in the space, and that in fact that action has more likelihood to save the government money than to reduce the number of choices in the market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'd like to pull in a little bit of a discussion here around Cisco specifically, because you posted something on Twitter in August that stood out to me. You said people who think Cisco is walking the halls, pushing private cloud over public cloud, are going to be in for a shock. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So the group I work in right now at Cisco is actually a group that's focused on service providers. Our existing large-scale network providers, as well as a number of cloud providers, both new cloud offerings from those service providers, as well as more over-the-top kind of cloud plays. And the key thing that we realized really early on, and I wrote a blog post that hinted at this, is that when you look at traditional deployment models, private cloud or resource-pooled computing models, and then public cloud models in which you heavily leverage freely available and cheap resources outside the company, that it's almost impossible to predict or to force the direction that a company is going to go within that sort of triangle of what I call hybrid IT.
Right.
They're going to land somewhere in that triangle, but they're not necessarily going to land at any given point at either side. Mm-hmm. So for a company like Cisco that really is coming from the infrastructure up in what they do, we really need to be able to provide an ecosystem of technology that can be both what the service providers are providing and making available to their customers, as well as what an enterprise can choose to deploy internally, both for private cloud, which is a huge cost-saving opportunity from both the utilization and a reduction, what I call reduction of bureaucracy perspective, a more efficient operations perspective, but also more traditional data center deployment as well. And to allow those technologies and those different operation models to overlay each other and work across the same technology platforms, and to do this in a way that is really gives a lot of freedom to companies. So we're not out there saying, guys, don't go public cloud because public cloud is bad. Go private cloud and start with private cloud, and eventually it'll get secure enough for you to move to public cloud. What we're saying is, no, there's some great public cloud offerings out there today. And in fact, we can't, we don't want to argue with the economics that have clearly been stated by many about what the public cloud can provide. What we want to make sure of, though, is that as you adopt those technologies, that you don't find yourself very much with a completely split multiple sets of operations models and multiple sets of capabilities that are out there, but that interoperability, that sort of more hybrid environment becomes built in. So that was the key part of that argument, that statement was like, somebody, I think it was Sam Johnson actually, who'd actually written a blog post sort of saying, these existing systems vendors are walking the halls saying, selling private cloud. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing. Look, we're saying private cloud is available as an option. We'll sell you private cloud as one of the options on the table. But anybody who thinks that a company like Cisco would stand there and say, oh, stay away from those public cloud environments, focus only on your data center, doesn't understand where we come from. The network, is the core platform, and public cloud exists on the network as well as the private cloud.
Good point.
That's
really
where we come
point.
from.
Dave, do you have any final questions for James?
Yeah, I think that's a real good point, and I think Cisco, to their credit, is good at providing people with good, solid advice in terms of the path to technology, private, hybrid, or public, is really dependent on your requirements. However, the other vendors out there, the guys who actually sell something in a box, have a tendency to turn directly toward private clouds, and they're not pushing public clouds at all. What's your comment on that? Do you think they're going to eventually come around and start pushing public clouds, or are they going to continue to push private clouds because they're able to sell stuff into private clouds and they don't have public cloud offerings?
Well, it differs on the different vendors' approaches, and I don't really want to tear apart, as a Cisco guy, tear apart the other guy's stuff in detail. But I will say, there are approaches to this where, if you're very component-centric in what you sell individual items and and bills of materials, then you're going to find yourself very much in a situation where you have to ask yourself, where is my strongest relationships to sell those materials? So that's one part of it. The other aspect of it then is if you're selling sort of vertical stacks that have their capabilities built into them, then I think you have issues as well. Around, do you have that at scale for a public service provider? And the other thing is, many of these companies are competing directly with the service provider community, which is a problem. It's a problem for the service provider to say, do I want to buy these technologies, these pre-built technologies from a company that's already got a bigger, cheaper to run version in their own data center that they're making available to the public? So that's the, we've got our challenges as well. And I think any of the existing systems companies really have to look at cloud computing as being something that they have to move aggressively to be prepared for in a variety of different ways. I think cloud in a box kind of concepts, they're funny, they're interesting. There are some that may actually be adoptable in sort of specific situations with specific folks, but my experience has been that so far has been that what you really want to kind of divide these kind of core infrastructure stories from the services that you want to run on those infrastructures, and I think that's what I'm waiting to see how the market develops. But my belief is that Cisco's very well positioned in terms of how that debate works out.
Great. Does that thoroughly answer your question, Dave?
It thoroughly answers my question.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap. James, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. James Urquhart with Cisco and the wisdom of clouds on this CNET blog network. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it was an honor to join you guys today. Thank you.
Great. Really appreciate it. On that note, I think we've got a fun This Weekend video that we would like to share with all of you.
You got a web show you want to create. You need something to make you look and sound really great. A lightweight, portable broadcast device. For a TV studio, you can't beat the price. TriCaster, TriCaster. For web television, use a TriCaster. TriCaster, TriCaster. For web television, use a TriCaster. Audio mixing and special effects. Multi-camera switching, digital muscle flex. Playback clips on your live remote shoots, a chroma key, green screen, muscle to boot. Live production and virtual sets, streaming like a pro across the internet. It's made of awesome and it's full of wind. The TriCast is what we use it this weekend. TriCaster, for web television, use a TriCaster. TriCaster, for web television, use a TriCaster. For web television, use a TriCaster. For web television, use a TriCaster.
What can I say? We have fun at thisweekend.com. If you would like to follow us, make sure you are looking at @TweeNetwork on Twitter. Please follow us, and then we can give you all sorts of updates for our shows. So that's about all the time that we have for today. Dave, thank you as always for joining me, and it'll be fun once you are on the show floor up north.
Absolutely. Have a great week, Amanda.
And also, if you would like to follow our guest from today, James Urquhart, it's @JamesUrquhart on Twitter. So please send out a great thank you to our sponsors, .co, that's DOTCO on Twitter, and @Storm On Demand, because they are what make shows like This Week in Cloud Computing possible on thisweekend.com. If you have ideas for the show, send them to pitch@thisweekend.com, or of course myself, Amanda@thisweekend.com, and we'll always get back to you. But be sure to join us again next week. Same cloud time, same cloud channel. I am your host, Amanda Coulong. Thanks for watching This Week in Cloud Computing.